To the February 10th Special Health and Housing Task Force meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we're on the traditional territory of the Nunavut First Nation. Today's special meeting of the Health and Housing Task Force will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number M192 governing open meetings during a state of emergency, and the Provincial Health Officer Order regarding mass gathering events. Therefore, members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person. Question period will be suspended throughout the duration of this order being in effect. Members will attend via Zoom at these meetings, and members of staff that are partaking in the meeting will be spread out in the boardroom. And so I'd like to welcome everybody to our meeting today. I would like to also acknowledge that Dr. Sandy Allison is here with us today. I think she's on Zoom somewhere. And also his worship is there in the back as well. Ordinarily, I don't get to do the mayor's report at these things, but I would like to recognize that tomorrow, February 11th, is the National Moose Hide Campaign Day. So I'd just like everybody to do that and make sure you're wearing your moose hide for tomorrow. With that done, do we have an introduction of late items?
No late items.
Seeing none. Next would be the adoption of the agenda as presented. Councillor Hemmond, seconded by Mr. Parmick. All those in favor, raise your hands and say aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. That's passed. Adoption of the minutes. Councillor Hemmond, seconded by
Sydney.
Thank you, Sydney. Any errors or omissions? Hearing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor, raise your hands or say aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, that's passed. And next we're on to presentations by the world-renowned Dr. Alina Turner, the CEO from Health Seekers, who will give a PowerPoint presentation on her report.
Hi everybody, and nice to see everybody again. I'm joining you from a cabin in the mountains, so hopefully my internet holds up, and I apologize if it doesn't. So I'm going to share my screen as well, and hopefully it all pans out here. I don't have a huge presentation for you today because I feel we've already gone through the plan quite a few times already, but I did want to, in the interest of reminding everybody what we're here to discuss today, just go through a one-slide summary of the overall directions, just to refresh your memories, and then get into the next steps a little bit further, and then have that as a kickoff to a discussion on transition planning. Now that we've got the strategy, that it's moving forward, and we've had the various input from community already in place, and it's really time to get to the next steps, which is implementation, and how do we do that. So thank you for acknowledging the land that we're meeting on. I'm joining you from Treaty 7, which is Blackfoot territory, and happy to be welcome to your community. So a couple of reminders, those of you that have forgotten since the last time we met, which I'm sure you haven't, but in case you have. So we've got the two commitments in the framework for action. The first is the commitment to truth and reconciliation. The second is the one around discrimination and stigma, and these were foundational to the plan and are embedded throughout the various actions and priority areas coming forward from the community. And then from there we had 80 actions that were specifically attributed to 6 priority areas. So the first is around system coordination, so having a social safety net that is responsive, that is agile, that is easy to navigate, and actually meeting people's needs was the thrust of the system coordination component. That also speaks to the need for coordination architecture, if you will, so that we understand exactly who is doing what and who's quarterbacking this process. And that's where the concept of a systems planner organization came forward towards. The prevention piece speaks really to a number of measures that are meant to reduce homelessness risk. So there might be components related to, again, early intervention, reducing experiences of trauma, engaging with the education system, and building this network that's meant to reduce risk and mitigate risk earlier on. Diverse housing options, the measures that are spoken about there are quite, I don't want to say non-innovative, but they're really speaking to the need for more affordable and supportive housing options in the community, and that includes more typical affordability measures, but also the medically supported or supportive housing options that are also gaps in the community. There's also where concepts of additional detox beds would come in as well, and treatment beds. So just more of these options and how we might get there. Leadership and engagement, recognizing that this is not going to happen in one sector or by one stakeholder group, that this is going to need to be a full community process, and engagement is going to need to happen simultaneously across these groups. So the measures that are spoken about there range for having public education campaigns around the plan and somebody's role within it, but also engaging the business community in what they might contribute to the effort on. The faith sector is another area where we spend some time thinking through. And then, of course, the role of leaders at the governance level in rolling this out. So be that through the system planner organization, and who's going to be stewarding this work moving forward after the task force completes their raison d'etre in this process. There's quite a bit of meat in this leadership and engagement priority area that I'm sure you'll recall from previous conversations. The complex needs capability is specifically focusing on what seems to be the highest pain point for the NIMO and many other communities, which is the intersection of homelessness, addiction crisis, obviously the COVID crisis, rough sleeping, and social disorder or concerns about public safety or community safety. So it speaks to flipping the script a little bit from blaming to how can we build resilient systems, resilient services that are able to respond to complex needs, rather than passing the buck from one to one another and not really solving the problem in the first place. So there's a bunch of measures that speak to rapid interventions from health and housing teams, for instance, moving the folks that are in particularly vulnerable situations into housing with wraparound supports, and how we might do that in partnership with peer groups and people with lived experience. And then the last piece, which is something that municipalities have taken on as a specific strategy. Here we embedded it into the health and housing plan because it seemed like it really did belong there, is this concept of, poverty reduction being another bucket of priority actions as well. And that speaks to food insecurity and what we might do to build healthy food ecosystems, reducing waste, etc., but also access to affordable transportation and accessible transportation. There's roles that we can play in terms of advocacy when it comes to low-income situations and social assistance, and all of that great stuff that it has been bucketed in the social innovation or the social enterprise work. So how do we create for-profit, for-purpose initiatives that can give people meaningful employment, but also mitigate some of these poverty effects as well. So all of these commitments and priority areas have a full range of actions, and I just gave you a bit of a flavor to remind you what's within them. But we try to go as detailed as we can without being so prescriptive as to think the plan's going to get implemented, next week. So it's meant to be a framework for action. It's meant to be a a strategic direction document that gives enough oomph and enough detail to know where we take it from here, but recognize that things like COVID will happen and there will be other disruptions that occur, so there's got to be enough nimbleness to treat this as a living document as well, but at least something that gets us going in this right direction with the right vision we can all get behind. From here, we also did some modeling work to figure out what this might look like when it comes to investments as well to meet some of these targets. So the investment needs to implement the first year of initiatives and first year of priorities would be $18.5 million. And the total that would be required to hit these targets would be 65.5 over 5 years. Now that is taking into account what's currently coming into the community, and that what's coming into the community is also becoming recalibrated for maximum impact as well. So this assumes we're optimizing what we have, and that any new money coming in is going to address these specific pain points around complex needs in particular, and those missing housing options in the community, as well as the system coordination architecture that's still a gap. So that is one slide summary of a very, very long document with even more appendices to it, but just to remind us what the work ahead is. And so in our conversations, what's been coming up as I would say, as a barrier to the next step is not necessarily knowing how to move from a strategic document into implementation. And so what I gave some thought to and I kind of put forward today for discussion is to think of this as something that we can tackle in an incremental manner. So while we have the big vision ahead of us, to not be overwhelmed by the 80 actions and start thinking what can we do in the next 3 months to move this into something that's living and breathing in the community, as opposed to something that we're engaging with only at the cerebral level at the task force. So there's two important questions. One is what can we do right now to make immediate or near-term improvements for people experiencing health and housing challenges? And then the second is, what do we need to do to create a strong and sustainable foundation for this work moving forward? And so I know today's conversation is going to be about the transition process. If you recall in our document, we talked about this concept of a system plan organization who's meant to quarterback the various actions that are outlined in the plan, and is meant to sort of bring folks together. And I'll just bring this up to show you there it is, to show you the big picture of how this would look. So we've talked about, what role will the task force have long term, or what's going to replace the task force at that governance level. What's going to be the role of the coalition moving forward? Now that we're not just talking about homelessness, we're talking about health and housing much more broadly. How are we going to embed lived experience in this work, which we've done through consultations, but we haven't done through kind of a sustained mechanism. And really all of these activities, so the policy coordination, the service provider coordination, building out the housing spectrum and the service and support options in the community, all of this is a whole lot of work that is currently not anybody's bread and butter. It's parts and parcels of what everybody does, but it's not anybody's, main thrust of their existence. So we went through a whole series of workshops with the task force, with the working group, with different decision makers, and in one specific range or two sessions, I believe, we had folks that are representatives of the task force and then some additional members in the community, the business community, the post-secondary sector, and brought them together to say, what are the right options for Nanaimo? Here's what other communities have structured their rollout infrastructure to look like. Is this going to work for us, or what might work for us? And the conclusion of that process was that we do need to have a nonpartisan entity that is charged with helping all of us implement this ambitious vision and helping us coordinate ourselves towards this new approach. And the other question to the group was, do we have somebody or an entity currently in existence that can take this on as part of their current mandate or with some additional resources? So there was a number of options that were assessed in that workshop. They included BC Housing, they included the city, included the coalition. The end conclusion was that we should be looking at something distinct. The other point to that was we need to do something right away, and so starting a new entity is going to put us back, and we might not have the oomph to get this over the finish line before we lose the community because they're looking for action. So is there a way that we can incubate this entity while we get going with the action work ahead of us? And so the recommendation was to do an incubation. The two options that were considered were to incubate this with the city or to incubate this with the United Way. The final recommendation was to incubate it with the United Way. So that's where kind of that piece stands. Obviously, we're going to need to do a bit of work between now and then, in the next 3 months, between the transition period of the task force and whatever new infrastructure is going to be put in place. Because the other part to this is this concept of a health and housing, and pardon me, around Council of Champions. I know there's concerns that came from one of the council members that this is not a good term, so we've switched that around, but this is the slide that's here. So there is this concept of decision makers, funders, sector representatives coming together at the highest decision maker level in the community to keep this strategic thinking going and coordinating these various systems, which, and from what we're seeing in the consultation feedback, is that there is work to be done on doing a better job coordinating funding and coordinating system priorities that we can do some further work on. So there is a recommendation for this body to come out and help move this forward at that decision maker level. There's also the recommendation that the coalition think through its role, and particularly around service provider coordination to make sure this is successful within the nonprofit and charity sector as well. And part of that is looking at how they're structuring themselves and how they're engaging members in this process. So again, there's considerations that they have to pay attention to. And again, the lived experience piece, I mentioned that there's lots of great examples of how we can run lived experience circle and have that embedded in our decision-making processes at various levels in this work. But we need to have something, otherwise it's going to happen in less than strategic or optimal manner, and we're going to miss out on that. So that's the big kind of infrastructure conversation ahead. And I'll come back to my slides for today and the next steps. As your external person, external consultant, watching what other communities are doing and where action seems to emanate from, and where people can get those early wins to actually put this into real life. So the first one is that we have quite a bit of work already underway that has emerged through this process around coordinated access. And so the work that CNHA and John Howard are going to be spearheading is to coordinate access to different services, to work on that priority list of people experiencing complex needs that we need to really prioritize for housing and support. That all is underway, and it could really be strengthened to improve those individual outcomes, which are going to be going a long way at the community level as well. So there's that work stream happening that we can amplify and really lend support to make sure it's achieved the intent of the plan, which is much more than homelessness, which is much more than only complex needs. It's really the restructuring of the local network of services in a way that's much more effective, efficient, and human-centered. So that's one work stream that I would pay attention to right away. And then the second one, which is another really important one, just looking at what's been happening in your community and thinking about, where the pain points are for decision makers on this. And I think it's really this issue of building trust and building a resilient governance structure as the foundation for this work. So that would be some work on exploring roles, ways of working together, mutual value and commitment. And again, that's not a one workshop and we're done. There's some interesting tensions that have emerged through this process and have come forward that we just need to work through. The good news, and I've said this a billion times, but everybody's hearts are in the right place. We need to create the space to build that trust and to build on success, have some wins under our belt so that we can see that there is ways of working together that can benefit everybody simultaneously, and it's not a pointing finger type of approach. So those would be kind of where I would start if I were you guys, and I know our time together is kind of concluded, but if I'm thinking about the next 3 months, which is what the question was to me, is what would I do over the next 3 months? I would create a transition team to get the system plan organization work underway and figure out exactly what roles everybody's going to have at the Council of Champions, make sure that those that buy-in is there, and then I would support and really spearhead the rollout of this integrated coordinator access work at the community level as well. So with that, I'm happy to take additional questions or speak to anything that you wanted me to speak to that I missed, but that's kind of what I had to say.
Thank you for that, Dr. Turner. If anybody has any questions, they can raise their hand or raise their blue hand. I'll keep an eye on you. Mr. McCormick.
Thanks, Dr. Turner, and thank you for all the work you've done over the past, I don't know how many months it's been. You do it for a long time. You feel like you're part of the community now. So
I do. I keep saying you leave. I apologize.
There's here. Maybe he can give you a key to the city. And if this works, he should. But I'm interested in knowing if you have a sort of a shorter deck that I can use or that we can use, certainly community agencies can use to present to their organizations, staff, boards, and also to use to share, because I think this is part of this is us getting word out and starting to build momentum around this plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for sure. We have like a billion versions. So, you tell me like I want the 10-minute, I want the 30-minute, and then 1 hour, and yeah, we've got them all. A great point. How do we socialize this to the sector? Because I think we had a really great conversation at the coalition meeting this week, and it was really encouraging to see how much it resonated with that community, because I'm guessing it's because they saw themselves in it, because we represented the inputs that we heard from them, and they were part of the lived experience circles and engagement there. But you're right, that's only one tiny group, and we probably need to do that en masse. Yeah. Thanks, John.
Do we have any other questions from anybody? I'd like to welcome Councillor Manson. She's joining us from the Millennial Falcon, I believe.
I can't leave home, so I'm daydreaming. I'm in Star Wars. Sorry for joining late, but many of you know COVID's hit my community, and that's just the way it is. So I'm here, but I'm really far behind, so I actually don't even know what's going on. So.
Well, we'll catch you up real quick. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm not seeing any. In this case, I certainly would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Dr. Turner, for your report. It has been a long time coming. Sorry about the pandemic, kind of slowed things up, but I'm sure that what going forward is giving us a great groundwork of how we can proceed and truly, I think, deal with the issues that are affecting our community. So I would like to thank you very much on behalf of myself and Councillor Hemmons, who may have something to say as well, I'm hoping.
You're hoping. I agree with John's comment that if this works, you really do deserve a key to the city. And I'm confident and just really grateful for all of your work over the past year and a bit with us. It's talking about system change is really difficult, and I'm glad that you've been leading us through it. So thank you very much for all of your work on this.
Thank you. I'd love to, see where you guys take it. It's this is the easy part. I think we said this many times, that coming up with the what should we do is way easier than doing it. But I promise you, just dip into one thing, because from there it all cascades really well. So I think it's only the first step that's really, really hard. It's the jumping off a cliff and then trusting that you're going to fly is the really, really tough part. And I feel like that's really where you guys are right now, in that, are we going to do this or not? And I'm really kind of leaning into the heart that you poured into this process too, that's going to ground you next step in taking that plunge. But you've got all the right ingredients. You've got some brilliant people that are committed to this. I hope you know how strong this community is. You've got it. It's now the go get it part. So whatever I can do to help you, push you, or I won't shove you, but encourage you to jump off the cliff and trust that it's going to work out. Happy to. Thanks.
Thank you. You're more than welcome to stick around for the rest of the meeting if you like. We're going to next, we don't have any delegations. We do have reports. I'm looking here, it is number 7A, and it's the Health and Housing Action Implementation, and it's to be introduced by Ms. Popelsing.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to keep this fairly brief. You've got the staff report on your agenda, and you'll see that in the recommendations that this is to recommend, the task force recommend to council a few different options for going forward. First of which is to recommend that council endorse the draft Health and Housing Action Plan. And then there's another two about directing staff to facilitate the establishment of a systems planner organization, or what Alina shortens down to SPO. And then the last one, to direct staff to seek funding from partners to establish a systems planning organization. And I'm just going to stop there and hand over to the chairs who are going to lead us through some discussion on some of these items. Thank you.
Thank you. First item on our recommendations is that the Health and Housing Task Force recommend that council, we're going to go with number A first off, endorse the draft Health and Housing Action Plan. We're looking for a mover on that. Moved by Councillor Hammond, seconded by Ms. McCormick. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on that recommendation? Looks like we've done all our discussions ahead of time. So I'm not seeing any questions?
I wonder, could we just have a conversation about, so if we endorse it at this table, what is the next step for council endorsing it? And just so our members understand the process.
Sure.
So our recommending it today would, on the 22nd, mean that it goes before council as a task force recommendation, that we collectively accept this plan and identify it as our path forward. Is that clear for everyone? Okay. Thumbs up, Emmy.
Okay. With that said, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor, raise your hands and say aye. Are there any opposed? Seeing none, that is unanimously endorsed. Thank you very much, everyone. And the next part, we'd like to have a little bit more discussion on possible recommendations. I'm going to move it over to Councillor Hemmons. Just going to start that off.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge that that was about a year and a half of work that just coalesced, and we've endorsed the plan. So thank you all very much. That's really exciting to have that taken care of. Our next steps, as Alina said, it's really about, we've set the stage and now we have to kind of take the leap of faith and figure out how we're going to do this. So staff have provided the recommendations in the report that Lisa just referenced, directing staff to facilitate the establishment of an SPO, and then also directing staff to seek funding. Dawn and I have heard some feedback, and I tend to agree with it, that we really want to pay attention to this not being a city-centric next step. So we'd be looking for some conversation on how would a recommendation to council, or what would be included in a recommendation to council that would feel good for this group in terms of laying out those next steps. So the way that the city has framed it is that the city's going to facilitate the establishment of an SPO. How does that, what am I trying to say here? Can we think of any language that would identify this as a collaborative effort, similar to the feedback that Dawn and I received? And we actually have some language that Dawn can throw up on the screen in terms of particulars.
Give me a sec, I have to put it in something that we can throw it up on the screen. Yes. Mr. Harrison, would you like to start off?
Actually, I'd just like to ask a question. In the two that the two recommendations that were put forward, if I could get the explanation or understanding of what the facilitating the establishment would look like from the city's language, just so I can understand the perspective that you guys are coming from, before we talk about some of the other.
Okay, so I'll give it a go, and I'll ask Ms. Lindsay if I get it slightly askew to step in. So our thought is that in Alina's report, she mentions a couple of options, including having a separate incubator organization, set up the SPO, Systems Planning Organization. But in order to do that, we have to facilitate conversations for what that's going to look like. And you'll see in the attachment to the report, there's a chart with stars on that starts establishing, based on Alina's recommendations, what's the roles of the different organizations. So what would be a systems planner tasked with? And so our job would be to sit down and facilitate the conversation of how that would work, potentially including the incubator organization ideally in that, and then also working with other partners to figure out, to flesh out that we're all on the same page. You can see at the end of the report we had a crack at what we thought. We were hearing from Alina in terms of responsibilities. And with that in mind, there's bits and pieces already underway, for example, like with the integrated coordinated access, that may or may not fall under the SPO. So all those things were what we were hoping. By the word facilitate, it wasn't that we're establishing it, we're facilitating the conversation to establish it. I don't know if that's articulating enough, Dale, but...
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is that I think whatever option council ends up going with, whether it's this interim idea of an incubator organization, which I'd still put under the umbrella of an SPO, by the way, or an SPO, there still needs to be either that fee for service or a grant or something that's provided, ultimately approved by council. So I think we're trying to reflect upon the fact that somebody would have to coordinate and work on that, so staff would normally be responsible for that. Or if it was ultimately setting up this arm's length organization, somebody is still going to have to be tasked with establishing that. So whatever method we move forward with on governance, that we would likely have a role in helping with implementation. But the word facilitate was specific, as Ms. Popolsing mentions, to encourage that broader discussion.
And then on the second one, with the going to the funders, one of the things that Alina had said to us throughout the process, and actually in the document, is that the intention behind a systems planning organization was not for only one organization to fund it. So our council has already put forward some commitment towards implementing the plan that includes things like the systems planning organization. But if you look at the amount that Alina's anticipated it costing, there clearly is a gap. And so it's important to have, as part of the conversation, some direction from council that we can approach formally people like BC Housing, Island Health, and others regarding how they see themselves supporting and resourcing the systems planning organization. And that also then sets the stage for our conversations about bigger items related to the investments in the community that may be needed. So that was the foundation of number 3. That's where we sat with that one in terms of the rationale. Does that help, Jason?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I think I was trying to understand how that was framed, and I'm also trying to acknowledge that we've been working through some difficult stuff, and we've gotten to this place where we're all very, very close. Just wanted to understand that, and I think looking at Alina's her presentation, and maybe if we're focusing on the second piece of the work stream there, I think just on the surface, I didn't see language necessarily that sort of spoke to that second work stream in the recommendations, although hearing your explanation, I completely get where you're coming from, and I'm seeing on the screen the 2 other things that Don had brought up there, which sort of enters into that conversation of how do we make sure that we're all on that same page. So I think if we're looking at it through those lenses, I think we're heading in the right direction. So thank you for the explanation.
Jason, that's great comments. I think, however the recommendation is worded, if we can all be behind it when it goes to council, that's going to serve us. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is to ensure that when it does go to council, it doesn't feel like it's owned unnaturally by the city, or that it incorporates everyone's ideas about what the next steps are. So great points.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. McCormick.
Thank you. So just a clarifying question about in your explanation, Lisa. Just wondering if you can explain, if you can clarify for me, is the SBO, in your estimation, in terms of the facilitation process, already in existence, or are we, to Councillor Bonner's point, looking at sort of a working group first that kind of establishes who owns the plan and what it is and what it isn't, where it lives, and who pays for it? Is that sort of is that before we sort of establish an SPO, or is the SPO already established at this point from your perspective?
Okay, guess plainly true, Don.
Sure.
Is the latter. The SPO doesn't exist, right? We would be facilitating the conversations to get it to exist. So, yeah, that's... Sorry if that's not clear. Trying to keep things short and concise in reports isn't always easy. But yeah, no, the SPO absolutely doesn't exist. And that's what we have to discuss. And you'll see attached to the report is one way of trying to define what are the tasks and responsibilities, because not everything will fall under the systems planning organization. There's stuff that is either already ongoing and underway, and I see Alina nodding, that's good. And there's stuff that is clearly the domain of the city. It's our responsibility for certain things like land use and things that are clear. So we need to get to the same page on that, and that's part of the facilitating conversations. So.
Any other, sorry?
Sir, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if there's any other comments on this before.
Yes, because we're going to need a motion somehow, somewhere out of this.
So I guess, Jason, I would ask you, and as one of 3 community representatives, so hearing how staff have explained the rationale for the motion that's been provided, does that satisfy, or should we take some time now to craft that second recommendation to council?
I think it broadly, of the 2 points that you guys have on the screen, it sort of broadly deals with, in my opinion, what it is versus what it isn't, where it lives, who pays for it. There's that aspect of the FPO that as long as we're having that conversation in a robust and kind of inclusive way, that makes sense. I can just briefly speak to the when it comes to the like coordinated access piece for moving forward, it was actually even written in our submission that us taking it on at CMHA with John Howard was about setting the foundation so it could be transferred over whenever it made sense to the entity that becomes created. So that is part of the plan, and that is how we wrote our involvement in it early to get it going, but it's being done so it can be ported over. So just wanted to add that into the conversation. I don't know if through the two things that are put forward there that it really talks about the first bullet point on this, on what's on the screen, around the broader, higher level oversight and implementation of the plan, who owns it, making sure that we're checking in to move it forward. Because in my opinion, I don't think that is the FPO. The FPO would be a tool that the community uses for specific tasks, but not necessarily ownership of the plan. And going through some of my own digging and research and looking back to the plan in 2008, which is still a relevant plan today, it's just deeper and conditions have changed. One of the things that was missing was that oversight and implementation. Very few things were ever actually implemented. So that's my fear, is that we create this thing that is great, it makes sense, it's sort of a next level to what was done previously, but if we don't structure that in a way that the community can get behind, then we may get too far into the weeds without setting up that plan. So I don't see that reference necessarily in the current recommendation.
Thank you. I have John and then Lisa.
Just in looking at what's on the screen again, I'm just reminded that work like this is critically important if we're looking at an ad hoc working group. I'm interested in the thoughts around who would be thought as the best sort of players to be around that table, to be working this forward, because we can gather any sort of group, ad hoc working group, but if there aren't people around the table who are able to make decisions on behalf of their organizations, it's going to be a nice piece of work, but it may not actually get buy-in. So in the recommendation, I think there needs to be sort of the context of recognizing that the work that gets done is going to be done in a way that actually is committing organizations and committing stakeholders to actually working collectively to make this happen. So I'm interested in that aspect of it as well, and want to make sure that in the recommendations that is thought that there's some speaking to that, at least when it's presented.
Thank you. Lisa?
I guess you'll notice that Alina has put in the recommendations, because by endorsing the plan, we're endorsing the priorities and the pieces, is a council of champions, and that kind of structure there. And Alina, I just want to ask you maybe to explain a little bit more about that in terms of John's question.
Well, there's just this distinction that we try to articulate, and it's the value that the task force had is that you guys brought really major players to these discussions that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So there was something of pretty big stuff that we were able to do because of it. So moving forward, if we lose the task force's is basically you're done, if you will. Your task was done, which is to come up with what should we do to deal with these challenges. But if we lose this level of governance oversight, we're going to lose the ability to to coordinate the policy and the funding that these key systems are representing. So to have VIHA at the table, for instance, the highest decision maker level, and I'm thinking like CEO level, for instance, to have the conversations and then options, etc. Having BC Housing at a decision level at the table as well, ensure that we're all moving in the same direction when it comes to capital bills,
You're kind of breaking up on us there,
allocates land, and who's going to do the capital, who's going to do the support. Those oh, sorry. Is it okay now?
Yeah, better now, yeah.
Am I okay?
Yeah.
Am I breaking up still?
No, you're not breaking up. You're
Okay. Yeah, sorry guys. It's
You can
mountain.
try turning off your video, Alina, and then you might get more bandwidth. You might have to dial in.
Okay. Okay.
Just let it go.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me though?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so that was the purpose of this whole Council of Champions. It's decision makers that can get us into the conversations, versus the SPO is the boots on the ground coordinating people that are going to be able to get some of these initiatives underway. But that doesn't mean that they're the bosses suddenly of VIHA, for instance. They're not. They're to be the glue that is going to keep us all moving in the same direction. Obviously, every system is going to do their own thing, and they're going to have their own priorities, but there's things that we've agreed to do together that we need to put some people power behind. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. But I think Sheila has her question, or her arm up, so she might want to weigh in too.
Yeah, Sheila and then John.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Turner. You did break up there, but I think what I heard is when it comes to Island Health, that we need someone like our CEO at the table, and that won't happen. He has the whole health authority, and really I'm ultimately responsible for, he places me in the position of, representing NIMO. And definitely I think that I see Dana and I at these tables where we are, is we really do focus on that health and really make sure that the required human resource teams and services are there to support, whatever, like, it's so hard for me to know, right? Like, we need to be at the table because when things are being implemented or we're making progress, we need to make sure that we're there supporting the clients, because they do need us to support them in their success. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like ultimately, you guys are going to choose like who, how high, our ask, if I wasn't an IMO, our ask would be how high in these structures can we get from a decision-making perspective, so that the higher up you can go, the more kind of system influence you might be able to have. So it sounds like, Sheila, you're kind of the NIMO go-to for this group. Now, your work and your representation of VIHA interest is going to be, pretty different than what I would think a system planner staff would do, which is kind of very much at that delivery level, or they might prepare briefing notes to come to you guys, but you're going to be the kind of conduit to your guys' structure. But somebody still needs to prep those briefing notes, or it's not, things are not going to happen without some manpower. So I think that the SPO function is meant to move all of these pieces forward. And we're not talking like a huge amount of people. I think there's, two or three people that would be helping move these initiatives out into the community. So we're not talking about like huge entity or anything like that. It's really just so that we can have people to do the work. Thus far, in a way, like as a consultant, I've done some of that for you, but I'm going away, you know what I mean? So, and I'm only part-time with you. But if you had somebody that was dedicated to do some of the stuff I'm doing, this is planning. This is what I'm doing with you, really. I'm setting up these, okay, what are our performance metrics? Who's going to contribute what data? How are we going to prioritize, and who are we going to prioritize through the coordinated access process? What kind of terms of reference do we need to have to move this forward? That's all systems planning work, and you don't want to consult all that out. You want to build community capacity for you guys to be able to do that longer term as well, and embed it locally. Bring in consultants because you need some technical aspect, but don't rely on consultants to do all of it because you're not going to grow your own capacity otherwise. So I hope that helps.
Thank you for that. And I just want to say before, I do need to sign off in 5 minutes. Just so you'll see me.
Okay, thank you. John and then Aaron.
Thanks, and as I promised to be the last thing I say, but just in terms of, the ad hoc working group, I'm not sure that necessarily has to be that council of champions. I think that actually that is really sort of, we're thinking about what that community entity is going to look like, and I really think it needs to be community members who have a voice in the community and are respected and represent the different interests in the community and can sort of bring forward a plan, a model and some terms of reference and a structure that we're going to be comfortable with as a community of Nanaimo. I'm not sure necessarily that, and I'm not saying that it has to be or doesn't have to be, but whether BC Housing would be a part of that or not, it's maybe a different kind of a conversation about who is on that council champions rather than who's on an ad hoc working group that tries to define what the SPO looks like. And maybe Dr. Turner wants to speak to that as well.
Yeah, and sorry, I just went on a tangent about what the Council of Champions does, but you're right, like the transition group, and I'm just thinking Kelowna did that too, where they had a implementation group that just flushed out all these pieces, and it was like a time, and I keep saying 3 months because that was kind of how they ran with it. They had a 3-month sprint, and their to-do was to recruit the Council of Champions and get that all firmed up, get the MOUs signed that needed to get signed, to get the money in place, and again, the shared investment model is smart. We're not asking for a whole lot of money. I know people are going to be like, but any money is too much money right now, but it's a value add to all of the system work. So I do agree that it shouldn't be one funder funding this whole thing. I mean, if you don't got skin in the game at this level, it's probably not a good sign long term. So somebody needs to pull those strings to get the funding in place as well. That could be this implementation committee too. And then lastly, the SPO. So getting that set up, if it's going to be incubated at United Way, well, there's a whole lot of steps between declaring that we're going to do this and actually having staff hired and trained and all of that set up. So that would be the mandate. It's time limited, very action focused. Get these key pieces going would be that's my sense of what is being proposed, at least.
Thank you. Councillor Hammonds.
Thanks, Don. This is a few conversations back. I agree with John. This is our Council of Champions is not what we're trying to do with the next step. What I'm seeing is that we have an interim step. We have endorsed the plan, and then we have a whole bunch of new structures that we're going to implement as a result of that plan. This transition group, let's call it that, I think should have a small mandate of figuring out the details of that. What is the mandate of the SPO? Who's going to do, what do the funding pieces look like? So I'm curious, given the conversation that we've had, are folks comfortable with recommendation B, directing staff to facilitate the establishment of an SPO, or do we want to play with the wording of that so we give council really clear direction about, perhaps this is a 12-week focused transition group that council's approved the plan and now staff we're going to task them with, for the next 3 months, we want a small group to figure out what exactly is this SPO going to do, what's it, what is the funding model, et cetera, et cetera. Is that in line with what other people are thinking? And if so, does the recommendation B cover it, or do we need to do some wordsmithing on it?
Do everybody
Marina.
jump in at once?
I see Jason's hand.
I see Jason and then Signe.
I like her suggestion around just looking at the language of that, and I just agree with everybody's approach of this is the interim piece, to make recommendations on the FPO and recommendations on what that council champions or whatever to be named later is. So this is that interim piece, and 12 weeks I think is longer than what some of us had thought, because we don't need to go 0 to 100, but we want to keep the momentum. But I also, if we are asking for high-level folks to be part of this, we also have to acknowledge the timelines and time commitments that they have. But as long as people involved in this are comfortable with those types of timelines, I can support that absolutely.
Thank you. Signe?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Alina. Hug to you. Nice to see you. Thanks to everybody. I just wanted to say that I think there's a difference between staff, calling up individual folks and saying, what do you think of this, and then coming recommendations forward, as opposed to convening a small group where people are talking through what do you, I think people have different ideas about what the SPO is, and I think people have different ideas about that Council of Champions, and just based on 4 or 5 conversations I've had over the last few weeks. So I think that there's a difference between bringing a group together and discussing and crafting recommendations on the deliverables of an SPO and what the role of the major funders might play in the Council of Champions. I just see there's a difference between bringing people together, convening a conversation, and coming to agreement versus doing some research and then making recommendations.
So your idea is that we set a small group of people to sit down and thrash this out for the next X number of weeks, and then come back with a recommendation to council?
Yeah, and I think the city staff are key to that because of, the city has a role to play and has hosted all of this process. But I think that there's other funders that also need to be part of that conversation. And so where is that? Where is that happening? To say, are we aligning our funding, or are people coming together to be part of that Council of Champions in a meaningful way? Because I think setting the SPO up and without, sorting through and having those key conversations with Island Health, BC Housing, the other folks who are going to need to align, as Alina has said, their assets and planning. We can set an SPO up, but it's not necessarily going to be effective or move things along. So I think the governance piece and what the SPO have to be discussed at the same time. And I'm just not sure everybody's got the same vision of that. So how do we get to that place between the funders and key players? And so yes, I think a conversation. I think that's what that's what the conversation around a small group with a short time period to work it through and come to some agreement along with the city staff.
So
Is that what you were thinking, John or Jason or others?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just round table, guys.
From my perspective, I think it's important that we understand that we have agreement on the structure and the operations of the SPO, but also that there's sort of a shared authorship between community and city on what that looks like, so that there is buy-in, so that we can get the support of the community and support of the city on moving forward. So I think what we're talking to is that the piece that's articulated between the lines in the recommendation from staff is there. It's just like we're just speaking to it in a little more detail, so that we acknowledge that that's in there, and that's going to be part of the initial actions that are taking place.
So I'm going to ask, is that your hand, Jason? Go ahead, I'll ask my question.
Yeah, I think I was just going to kind of just add to what John says there. I think if we took an approach of whatever the motion could be that acknowledges that we're working through what is set out in Alina's report through work stream 2, to set up working through those as our guiding principles, to set up a working group to define, to make the recommendations on the governance structure, council or committee of champions, whatever that is, and the SPO. I think that Alina has good language in the report of how we want to try and work together in a different way. So if we can acknowledge that we work through those lenses to do this work, I think we are off to a good start.
Okay, so my question now would be to staff is, knowing of all the rules and regulations that exist in the city in terms of putting people on committees and stuff like that, and real committees and not being committees, how do we go about doing this? Because what I think I'm hearing is that we want to pick a finite number of people to just sit down and hash out exactly what the SPO is going to be and do, and then come back to council with the terms of reference for it.
So my suggestion, first of all, taking back a step maybe, and our intent, I think John captured it, is our intent by including the word facilitate was to try to capture some of what I'm hearing discussed today, that, not to go away and solve the problem, but to facilitate discussion with the broader group about, how we move forward together. So if the recommendations went forward either the way that staff's presented them or slightly modified the way you're discussing, in my mind it would go to the next council meeting, and then if it's a working group, if we formalize that in the motion as a working group, staff would go away from that council direction on the 22nd with that mandate, call that working group together. It wouldn't be a committee of council, it wouldn't have the same structure that we have now or rules or agendas. It would be a more informal group that would meet and provide input that would ultimately be captured and presented back to council in a report. So at least that's my idea of how we move forward. But
by head nods, is that what everyone else is thinking? Okay.
I think we're all talking about the same thing. It's just a matter of language. So I guess my question would be, are we okay with the staff recommendation staying as is, or should we craft it to reflect the conversation that we're having? And for an example, so recommendation B could be direct staff to convene a transition group to guide the implementation of the SBO and report back to council by March 31st. Like we could be specific like that, but if we're all kind of on the same page about what is intended by recommendation B, then we can simply go with that and acknowledge that we know what the next steps are, or we can actually embed it in the report to council, which personally I would prefer, so staff are really clear and we're really clear. Maybe I can send this to Dawn and you can throw it up on the screen and we can start there.
Sure.
Regarding Directing staff, so recommendation C, directing staff to seek funding from partners. My sense of this is that this would be a part of the conversation of this transition group. Can I get some other people's thoughts? I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. So go ahead, Kim. Sorry, I'm kicking off.
That's exactly the way I see it, Aaron, so I think that's a good observation, good comment there. I just wanted to also make a statement that if there's an independent working group, that the Chamber would dearly love to be on that working group and continue to bring the thinking of business forward to this path.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Okay, Dawn's gonna get it up there, I think.
And if we just go to a different view for us.
So does this mean the task force staying on board, or we're gonna pick people from today to go on?
That's a really good question, Emmy. I think once we sent the endorsed plan to council with the recommendation to endorse it, I think the task force has completed its mandate. And so this small transition group wouldn't be the entire task force. And trying to figure out who should be on that transition group is a key piece of, I think, what we want to discuss today. But that doesn't necessarily need to go in the recommendation. The recommendation can simply be, we endorse the plan and we want a transition group with an 8-week turnaround to figure out the nuts and bolts of developing the SPO.
Yeah, and I think the recommendation should come from the task force who should be on here.
Okay.
Like if the Chamber's vying for a seat, then Senamo's vying for a seat, then like, you know what I mean? Like we're all gonna be wanting to have a seat, so we're gonna have to all be okay with that. Not everyone's gonna have a seat on here. Mm-hmm. But if you need Senamo fills, there'll be some, I would rumble, that's for sure.
Yeah, that would be my strong recommendation as well, that Senamo has definitely a seat at the table. You'll be a strong player in this going forward.
Okay, so I can leave the meeting now.
So we have a potential motion, direct staff to convene a transition group to guide the implementation of the SBO to report back to council by March 31st, 2021. It's not proper English, but it's a motion.
I wrote it on the fly, come on. Emmy, just jump in.
Emmy, are you seconding that? I think it's a motion by Councillor Emmons, and I think there's a second by Emmy there. Discussion, folks? Jason?
Is this meeting?
I do think there needs to be language about the structure of the governance and oversight group, because that is distinct from the SPO. They're not the same thing.
Right. So we've got...
And I think the governance piece is actually even more important than the SPO at the start. And for the big picture, the SPO will get off the ground and have a specific, it's a tool, it's a function. So I think there has to be some sort of reference to that piece of it. And just to the previous commentary about seats, I would suggest that maybe there would be agreement about what sector representation there might be, but I don't know if hashing out the exact individuals right now needs to be accomplished. But there definitely needs to be a seat for business. Island Health, the First Nation, someone from the social services sector, that piece. That's my comment. Thanks.
Okay. And Signe, you're next.
I agree with Jason. I think the governance and funding for is separate from the deliverables of the SPO. So I think it's governance and funding. But the city's been clear, they've got some funds, but the concept is, I think Alina's report said that it was aligning other funders into the
Go ahead, Aaron?
So I'm wondering if I'm hearing about two groups now. So we've endorsed the plan. Is there a transition group to look at the SPO and then a transition group to look at governance overall, including funding? Okay.
Or the bigger question, would that come out of the SPO once it's up and running?
Can it be a deliverable of the SBO?
Yeah, I could see that, but we don't, personally, I think the SPO is one piece. It's like integrated coordinated access. It's a piece of the puzzle, but governance and funding has to overlay all of it. Alina, if you're still in the call, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just conserving my bandwidth.
Yeah. So I think there's no question in my mind that we need a small transition group to look at the SPO, because the SPO is going to be the workhorse. And then we also need to have a conversation about where the SPO fits within the broader governance, funding, etc. So is that maybe we meet there's a small group that is convened for the next 2 or 3 months to look at those two pieces at the same time? Or how are people feeling about this?
I think you can get it both done with that. I mean, we talked about the 3 month time frame only because we know it takes time to wrangle, system players. But you've got it's a working group. So I don't know if you need to have. I don't know if you need to overthink it, if you will. Do the deliverables. Like, what do we want to get out of this? We want specifically, what are the things we're trying to get done in this time frame, and then let them go get it or do it.
Okay, I have something new coming at me. Give me a second here.
So we do have a motion on the floor.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we do.
Maybe the mover and seconder want to withdraw that once they see what this motion is, an option.
So I'm not sure if you guys can hear Sky, but we have a motion on the floor that is getting quickly lost. So the options are we can vote on the motion as is, or Emmy and I can rescind it and wait for this, kind of wordsmith it a little bit more and then go with a different motion. Dawn's going to bring up something for us to look at here.
Okay.
And guys, I just want to reaffirm, I think we're getting there. We're close. These are just the last details or not the last details, but we're setting up the structure of how we're going to do it. Now that we know what we need to do, how are we going to do it is the next question.
Kim?
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. I just want to publicly go on record as disagreeing with Jason Harrison for the first time in about 3 weeks, 3 months. I feel strongly that if sectors are identified and already represented at this table, it should be to their option to continue on the working group, as opposed to onboarding new members, orienting them, bringing them up to speed. If we're committed to doing something by March 31st, I certainly don't want to start to learn about a lot of other people, and we're at this point in the conversation together. So I figure it's probably more efficient to continue together to work on the working group. That's just the comment.
So guys, we have a second motion on the screen. Can everyone just have a really quick look at it? And we don't want to replicate... Sorry, Emmy, I didn't catch that.
It's not showing a new motion to my mind.
There should be 2 lines now. The top one was the first motion, and there should be another motion just below it. The newer one. A newer one.
Maybe for clarification, you could read out the motion?
So the one on the table right now is the top line, staff director to convene a transition group to guide the implementation of the SBO to report back to council by March 31st, 2021. Another possible motion could be direct staff to convene a transition group to establish the overall governance requirements as well as guide the implementation of the SBO to report back to council by March 31st, 2021.
So basically we have two buckets of work. We need to figure out the SPO and then we need to figure out governance. Do we want the same group doing both?
So I have next Jason and John.
I support and prefer the second one. I think that's a good inclusive one to start, and I just wanted to acknowledge Kim's comments that I appreciate those. I appreciate those as well, and I think part of my intention was, and I also understand, those of us that are working together, and we've got to this point, and there is that familiarity. Part of why I was suggesting it is I'm also acknowledging that I'm a pain in the butt and people are probably tired of hearing and dealing with me by default. So I was trying to present other ways for other people to be in there as well. So I can go either way.
Okay, well, if it makes you feel any better, Kim's not the only one that hasn't disagreed with you.
Karen? Me, you need to rescind the motion.
Yep.
The first motion.
Okay. So can we just do that?
So we're going to rescind the first motion. Is the seconder okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
This
Now,
is painful, you guys.
Oh, Abby.
well, this is a committee, so we do this extra hard work. So we now have an option, direct staff to convene a transition group to establish the overall governance requirements as well as guide the implementation of the SBO to report back to council by March 31st, 2021. So if that is the motion by Councillor Hemmons, I'd be looking for a seconder. I have a seconder
That
by...
was Jason.
What was that, Emmy?
Well, that one, Jason seconded that.
Okay. Jason, are you seconding that? Okay, Jason seconding that. All right.
Okay, so I'd like to ask staff, if this motion is to pass, does this give you clear direction of what your next steps are?
It does. I'll be honest, I am concerned about capacity.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Just because it's a short timeline and we're on a pretty crunchy deadline with Reimagine, but I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
Of course.
But, we'll find a way to make it happen. So,
Okay,
yeah,
thank you for that.
that's okay, but ultimately, this is the direction to move, and that's no problem. It's just in terms of the timing, in terms of workload.
Okay, well, we can play with the timeline, like we don't, these steps are gonna be crucial, right? We've done all of this work to say, this is what we wanna do, now we gotta figure out how are we gonna do it. We don't wanna rush this, nor do we want it to stall.
So, in terms of timelines, this will be coming to council on February 22nd. This committee, this task force cannot direct staff to do anything. We can only recommend to council. So nothing's really going to start formally until the 22nd, if and when council agrees to these recommendations. I'm guessing that's correct, Your Worship? Yes, he's nodding to me that I got what I'm doing here. So, with that said, is that timeline okay? February 22nd to March 31st.
It's pretty tight.
I think a lot of it just comes down to working through that chart and how quickly people agree on what the different aspects are. So it could go quickly in a 2-hour meeting, or it could take several. So we can try.
So maybe we don't put a date on it.
I don't think a date's necessary.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just worried about not meeting.
Yeah, and that's why I asked.
And
that's
it
fair.
could be that it's one meeting and we're all on the same page and we get all the, it flows, but then, there may be people who aren't part of this discussion who become part of the group. We've got to get them up to speed, explain why we're at where we're at. I'm not sure the intention of how broad this group goes, but it sounds like most of the people on the task force, or several people who want to be on the transition team. So I'm not sure those pieces.
Okay, so if we would we're looking to what the heck is that called?
A friendly amendment?
A friendly amendment, thank you. Where we're dropping March 31st and putting in next Thursday? No, just dropping March 31st.
So we just need the mover and the seconder to agree to that.
So is the mover and the seconder okay with that?
I am.
I got a thumbs up from the seconder. I now have a full-blown motion on the table, finally. Is there any further discussion?
I do have a question. So I'm comfortable, given the conversation we've had that we've coalesced around this idea of a transition group. I'm curious, probably from staff's perspective, I don't want to leave you guys hanging in terms of who should be on this transition group. So would it be beneficial to have that conversation and embed it in the motion, or is that a conversation we can have later? And what does that look like from your end if this motion goes forward? Because we haven't established a transition group, right? I don't want to leave you guys with the burden of figuring out who needs to be on that.
It may be, and I think, sorry to step over a second there, but I think Mr. Harrison had the suggestion that you may want to identify sectors. So it could be a working group consisting of SFN, Island Health, and industry representatives, and whoever else I'm missing, something general like that, without specific names. At least try to hit those main groups.
How does that, okay, and thumbs up from Emmy. Now, there is I know that there was a desire for this next group to be small and nimble. Where are people feeling in that? So we know, I'm just trying to get clarity around who we want on that transition group and why. So if we want BC Housing and Island Health, those, kind of big behemoths and the funders with us in those conversations, we need to be explicit. John, I'm seeing you shake your head. Is this small transition group community focused and we determine and then we bring in the funders? Okay.
That, from my perspective, is the piece that we actually have a community group that represents the community itself, and that it can make a recommendation. I think we have the capacity to do that, and we just need to have, I think, just sort of fairly representative. I think the business, I think First Nations, service sector, the city, and I don't know if I'm missing one or two on that list, to convene and get this work done as quickly as possible, and then report back on the recommendations. And again, in the spirit of this, it is a living, breathing document, and it's a living, breathing structure and organization. We can make changes in the long term, but we're trying to keep the momentum going, as Councillor Evans has indicated.
I agree with you, John. So if the motion were to pass as is right now, a question to staff, do we need to name SFN, community service sector, or are we, if we agree that a business rep, someone from Snuneymuxw, social service in the city, if that's our kind of core component of this transition group, is that something we need to embed in the motion, if we agree with that composition?
So if you want, through the chair, if you want something that's just more general about capturing local community input, I think so, local community group, but I would still want to specifically say, and including SFN, I think that's important to recognize.
And that's, we're government, so we're not necessarily seeing this community, and so it's SFN's government too, so.
Now, just to probably make things easier, we'll be looking to draw these folks from the task force members, just to make it quicker and easier.
I would suggest so.
Yeah, it would make it easier. Yeah. So the question is was the intent when this was suggested, Jason had mentioned others, to bring in others, because then we have to get them up to speed. So open either way, just so you know.
Mr. Jason?
Yeah, I think I agree with Kim's assessment on this, that if we do pull from here, that makes sense, because people that are working together, I think we could live with that. And from social services side, I would be nominating John to be our rep there.
Well, we haven't even got the motion passed yet, so let's hold on there. So
I know.
So, would we be looking at, I would just counting people, like social service sector, staff, council, business, SFN, that's 5, drawn from the Health and Housing Task Force. Is everybody okay with that number? And we'll just sort out who later? I got
Great.
at least a 1 thumb up. Okay, does staff need that in the motion?
I don't think so.
No,
No, it will
okay.
just be captured in the minutes.
Okay, so we've got city reps, Nanaimo, business, social service. What was the 5th?
Council?
Oh, council, okay, I wrapped that into city. Okay, so
Okay.
5
All right.
stakeholder groups, sure.
In that case, is there any further discussion on the motion on the floor? I'm not seeing any, so I will call the question. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye. Are there any opposed? Seeing none, that is unanimously endorsed. Thank you very much, everybody. Trying to think, where are we in our agenda? Is there any more recommendations going forward that we wish to present? Or are we going to quit while we're ahead?
So where we're at, guys, is we're sending recommendations to council to say, yes, we agree with this plan, we endorse it, and we have a small core group of task force members going forward to figure out how to implement it, how to kind of put the flesh on those bones. That's what we're saying to council on February 22nd. Great. I'm proud of us, guys. That was painful, but so good. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to thank Demi. I'm going to move along in our agenda. Under other business, we have correspondence from Mayor Thompson, dated December 21st, 2020. We have the homeless population displacement from Wesley Street encampment. Council asked it to send it to the task force for information. And are we going to accept it as information? Does anybody wish to speak to it?
I'll move proceed and then speak.
Okay, I have a motion to receive for information from Councillor Emmons by the seconder. Second by Mr. Smythe. All those in favor, raise your hands. What's that? Are you going to speak to it, right?
Well, I'll just frame it up and say that this came from a group of community members who felt that it was obviously important and they wanted it to land at this table and they wanted you guys to see this specifically. So council directed it here for your information and our job is simply to receive it.
Okay. So a motion to receive is on the floor. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hands and say aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, that's accepted. That brings us up to the end of our task force meeting, and I'm going to guess this is our last one. In that case, I would like to personally thank everybody who's been with us for the last long time, and Dr. Turner for the work that she's done to get us to the point where we are today. Specifically, I'd like to thank both our members, not members, but all the folks from the federal government, from the province, BC Housing, from Island Health, SFN, United Way, John Howard Society, Canadian Mental Health. We also have the RCMP staff, and I'm probably missed somebody along the lines. What's that? And from the chamber, oh yes, and from Mr. Spice from the chamber. Thanks, Kevin. You have all been tirelessly in this pursuit of, and I think all of our hearts are in the right place, that we want to see a solution, and we want to see a solution that works in Nanaimo. And I'm quite positive that the work that we have done here will be that solution. So thank you very much for all of you have done. At this point, we'd be high-fiving and hugging each other. We can't do that because the health person's here and she won't like it. So I'm going to suggest that we're now at the end of our meeting. If anybody else anything they'd like to add?
Hi, it's Sandra Allison. I just wanted to thank you all for welcoming me, and congratulations on the decisions you made today.
Thank you very much. Joe, go ahead.
I'd like to add one more thing.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I think this has been a great process. I think it's been really, it's demonstrated the impact of bringing people together, and I think it actually has strengthened us as a community. I know that the work that I had done with John Howard Society has been strengthened by the relationships that I've built through this process, and I think it's really been affirming and demonstrates the power of bringing community together to jointly share in difficult decisions that are made and challenges that are faced by communities and by the city. So thanks very much for establishing this process and for inviting us to be a part of it.
And Sydney?
I wanted to echo John's comments. Thanks to our co-chairs, thanks to the city staff who organized the meetings and endured all these meetings with us as we talked about something that we're all passionate about. So I'm really grateful to the city for hosting us. And I have to say, we started this long before COVID hit. COVID hit, and echoing what John and others said, the Health and Housing Task Force has allowed us to build really strong relationships to get a lot of COVID Reaching Home funds out the door. We're working with Emily and her team, funding, all of so many of the agencies on the ground, and that the Health and Housing Task Force was one of the ways we built our knowledge and understanding and relationships. And I really appreciate being part of this community. And everybody cares, and that speaks volumes in a community where people show up. And Heidi's there, and Lisa McCarthy, and there's so many people who are bringing their funding to this community and work evenings and weekends, because I know they're emailing and FaceTiming and texting us all. So I'm grateful for being part of this community for as long as it lasted, and the relationships are good for those of us who are funders. Thank you.
Emily, did I see your hand up? How about...
I've got mine out again.
Yeah, Jason.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for wading into all these really difficult discussions, and I'm really excited that we're going to be doing things in a different way, and ultimately it's going to lead to a healthier community, and it will have impact on the lives of the people that live in our community, and that's the most important thing. So just thank you for everybody being present and giving all this time for this difficult work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smythe.
Yeah, I just wanted to join the chorus of gratitude here, and thank you for inviting, for the original planners and for the co-chairs to invite business to the table, a rather unique and unusual move that I think is working very well for all of our efforts here. Keeping that connection to the business community is very important. The health of our community is very important to the business community. The health of our economy is based on the health of the community. So thanks, Tony.
Thank you. Emily.
Yeah, I'll take my mask off. I just really want to thank everybody for, the work that was before me when I came on the table, but recognizing Nanaimo as a government, I think it's been a challenge for us to get ourselves at some of the tables as not as token gestures, but as a voice. And many of you know the social determinants of health, homelessness is a big issue for Indigenous people, and this is the first time we've actually been funded to do the work that we've always been doing. And it's hard work, and I'll be honest, these meetings have been frustrating more than my chief and council meetings, so, but I also think because the issue is so challenging, and I think we say the same thing, but say it in a different way, and that's what frustrates me, I guess. But I'm also COVID fatigued. Many of you guys know I've been doing this for a long time, so have you guys. But I am really grateful because the relationships that I have at this table and the voice that I can give and have difficult conversation to still be friends, or maybe we're not all friends, but still kind of like each other at the end of the day. But we are very passionate about homelessness in the sense that it shouldn't be an issue in Canada, but it is. And we have so many of our people in active addiction on the streets, and it's challenging to know that that's my family. And maybe I didn't share that story with you guys, but that's why we're passionate about it. Me and Marina both have family on the streets, and we can't save people, but we can create barriers and bridges for our people to either come eat at the table if we serve it. But I also know that the challenge that we have with the city of Nanaimo with the lack of compassion and empathy has been the most challenging for me as an Indigenous woman. The racism and the challenges that people portray to our homelessness just shows the level of privilege, I guess, that's in the city. But I do thank you guys, and thank you for putting up with me, my silliness, and challenging you guys. But I know that for me, at the end of the day, that I feel Nanaimo heard, and I thank the city staff and Aaron and Dawn for always recognizing that we are different than a nonprofit. And the work I do, I really cherish, but I also know that for me, I think for my commitment will be to show up at these meetings, because I know that the importance of the SBO and the governance will make this homelessness strategy get lifted up. And so me and Marina will come up with a plan so that I can attend all these meetings, but I think that the challenge has been the time of day too for me. But I thank you guys all, and I'm really grateful, and if anybody wants to fund Nanaimo for other work, we are available. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Much love.
Yeah. I think Ms. LeHue had her hand up as well.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you for everyone. It's been a really good experience for me, and certainly have used all of the discussion, the processes, and the approach. I've shared that across many different communities in the province. Some of the other communities that are also looking at this and kind of how this group has really worked together and how they've been able to connect and come up with a really good plan. So thanks for letting me be part of this process. I really enjoyed myself, and I look forward to see the next step.
Yeah, me too. Good. Does anybody else wish to say anything? Either that or...
I will.
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, thank you for the thank yous, and it's actually my honor to have served with you on this. So I really, couldn't thank you more for letting me in your community and letting me walk this path with you guys. It's really been an honor. And Emmy, I know you're frustrated with us. Keep being frustrated with us, because you gotta like keep knocking, and we're getting it. We're getting it slowly but surely. So I really appreciated just getting some bones on this, what this reconciliation mean, and I think having the First Nations voice at this governance table has been instrumental to that, and I hope you see how important that's become in the architecture of this work moving forward, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you take that jump, and I'll be cheering you on, and I'll see you at the bottom.
And I think our best thank you to you would be to make sure that we implement your plan and it's successful. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thanks.
Okay. I'm not seeing anybody else. I want to thank everybody for their time today. Also for the mayor dropping in and being with us as well. I think he's just here to keep an eye on me, but that's fine. And I would wish you all a great week, and we'll see you. You should come to the February 22nd meeting of council when we're endorsing this plan. Great, hopefully. Thank you. Okay, I need a motion to adjourn. Motion by Councilor Hammond, seconded by everybody else. We'll pick Mr. McCormick. All those in favor, raise your hands. Okay, thank you. We'll see you all. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.